Over 1,000 Muslims are performing one of the most important rituals of Hajj today in Saudi Arabia. In his sermon at Mount Arafat, Sheikh Abdullah bin Sulaiman Al Mania said, Islam teaches the ways to deal with economic and worldly problems. He said life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the best source of guidance towards the right path. After spending the day at Arafat in reverent prayer, the pilgrims will stay at Muzdalifah for the night. Pakistan says India faced failure by trying to take the case of spy Kulbhushan Yadav to the International Court of Justice again. Speaking in Parliament, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan provided consular access to Indian RAW-serving terrorist commander Yadav twice, in line with ICJ recommendations. He also said India has been trying hard to push Pakistan into the blacklist of the Financial Action Task Force, but Islamabad has taken all steps to avert the move. Meanwhile, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi called on the world community to dissuade India from its disproportionate arms build-up. She was commenting on Delhi's procurement of Rafale warplanes in a briefing in Islamabad. The global cases of COVID-19 have crossed 17 million with more than 667,000 deaths. Brazil has reported a record increase in the daily number of COVID-19 cases as well as the deaths. The country logged over 69,000 infections in the past 24 hours. 1,599 people died overnight, with the toll crossing 90,000. In the United States, more than 61,000 tested positive and 1,200 died overnight, raising the death toll to over 150,000. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 32 people lost their lives in the past 24 hours, with the death toll crossing 5,900. 1,114 new cases were recorded, with the tally over 277,000. Unidentified attackers have killed 14 villagers and wounded another 6 in Nigeria's central Kogi state. In a statement, police said assailants on motorcycles randomly opened fire on locals in the Agbudu village. Italian champions Juventus have suffered a shock 2-0 defeat at the hands of 13th place Cagliari at the Sardegna Arena. Both Luca and Giovanni scored in the first half for the host as they valiantly denied an old lady onslaught to keep a clean sheet. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back now for the news in detail. Over 1,000 Muslims will perform one of the most important rituals of Hajj today in Saudi Arabia. After spending the day at Mount Arafat in reverent prayer, the pilgrims will stay the night at Muzdalifah. More details in this report.
Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam which is mandatory for affluent Muslims to perform at least once in their lifetimes. The pilgrimage commemorates the sacrifices of Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, and his family. It is performed in 7 steps, starting from the 8th day of the lunar month of Zul-Hajj. Some of these rituals are performed across the world by Muslims on the eve of Eid al-Adha. Muslims from abroad are not attending the pilgrimage to curb the possible spread of COVID-19 and ensure social distancing. While last year, nearly 2.5 million pilgrims from all over the globe performed Hajj. Saudi Arabian officials say all measures have been taken to prevent the spread of coronavirus during the pilgrimage.
Now, the global cases of COVID-19 have crossed 17 million, with more than 667,000 deaths. Brazil has reported a record increase in the daily number of COVID-19 cases as well as deaths. The country logged over 69,000 infections in the past 24 hours. 1,599 people died overnight, with the toll crossing 90,000. More details in this report.
The new coronavirus is wreaking havoc in the Americas with over 150,000 being infected and thousands dying every day. The pandemic is raging in Brazil, where Mexico and Peru are struggling to contain the outbreak. In the US, more than 61,000 tested positive, while over 1,267 died in the last 24 hours, raising the death toll to over 150,000. The aggressive spread of the virus has been called into question President Donald Trump's push to open the country's economy.
As we have emphasized throughout the pandemic, the path forward for the economy is extraordinarily uncertain and will depend in large part on our success in keeping the virus in check. Indeed, we have seen some signs in recent weeks that the increase in virus cases and the renewed measures to control it are starting to weigh on economic activity.
Europe's fear of Spain's consistent increase in new cases has stalled plans of lifting travel restrictions. Despite repeated appeals by the Spanish government not to cut the country off, the UK urges caution is necessary.
But it's absolutely essential we acted when we did. It's why all four nations of the United Kingdom acted together, and the figures since have turned out to justify that action. So we have to, I think, have a clear message and make sure that we act by adding entire countries to that list for the time being.
In Asia, spread in mainland China continues to inch up with Beijing reported 105 new cases, the country's highest in months. But the outbreak in South Korea appears to have slowed as new cases dropped to 18, the lowest in a month. Meanwhile, Australia has reported the highest number of cases since the coronavirus pandemic began. The worst hit state of Victoria reported 723 infections and 13 deaths overnight.
A record high of 52,152 people have tested positive for COVID-19 in India over the past 24 hours. 775 people died overnight in the country as the government mulls easing its 130-day lockdown to revive an ailing economy. New Delhi's health ministry says the death toll in the country is nearing 35,000, while over 1.5 million people have been infected by the virus. The Indian government announced Unlock 3.0, its third phase of easing restrictions under which gyms, nightclubs and yoga centers are set to reopen. India's government has been desperately pushing to lift restrictions as the economy was already jittery when the pandemic struck the country hard. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, over 90% of COVID-19 patients have recovered. The health ministry said the number of active cases has dropped to 25,347. The ministry said 32 more people have died, increasing the tally to nearly 6,000. It said over 1,100 tested positive in the last 24 hours, taking the count to over 277,000. The ministry said 1,179 patients of COVID-19 are in a critical condition. Sindh remains the worst-hit province with over 120,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 93,000 cases. Now, Pakistan says India faced failure by trying to take the case of spy Kulbhushan Yadav to the International Court of Justice again. Speaking in Parliament, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan provided consular access to Indian RAW's serving terrorist commander Yadav twice, in line with ICJ recommendations. He said India made false claims of not getting free access to its agent commander Yadav. Qureshi said Delhi has also been trying hard to push Pakistan into the blacklist of the Financial Action Task Force, but Islamabad has taken all steps to avert the move. Meanwhile, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi called on the world community to dissuade India from its disproportionate arms buildup. She was commenting on Delhi's procurement of Rafale warplanes in a briefing in Islamabad. Faruqi said such arms transfers call into question the commitment of international supplies to nuclear non-proliferation. Talking about the three-day Eid ceasefire in Afghanistan, Faruqi said it is a positive step towards sustainable peace in Afghanistan. The US Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad has arrived in Kabul to push for intra-Afghan negotiations. The US envoy held meetings with President Ashraf Ghani and head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah Abdullah. In a statement, the presidential palace said the leaders discussed the completion of prisoner swap and reduction in violence, which are prerequisite to the talks. Earlier, Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the group will be releasing all remaining Afghan prisoners. Shaheen asked Kabul to fulfill its end of the peace pact and free the remaining 5,000 Taliban detainees. Moving on, Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The National Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Avasin-Vasyan region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapons caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. State media said PKK militants often use northern Iraq to plan cross-border terrorist attacks in Turkey. Ankara holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. Moving on, the United Arab Emirates says it supports Egypt's efforts to resolve the crisis in Libya. In a phone call, UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan and his Egyptian counterpart Sameh Shoukry discussed regional issues. The Foreign Ministry said the leaders discussed ways of supporting the ongoing efforts to promote a political settlement to the crisis. It said Sheikh Abdullah has also emphasized the historical and strategic relations binding the two countries. Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the Government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army. Abu Dhabi and Cairo support LNA's commander Khalifa Haftar against the UN-recognized government. Meanwhile, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has ratified a law to restrict retired army officers from running in elections without due permission from the military. Sisi himself is a former army chief who seized power from the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, in a coup defeat. An official Gazette notice said both active and retired officers are not allowed to run for the presidential, parliamentary or local elections. The law permits the army to offer an opinion on constitutional amendments and bills related to political rights, elections and national security. The legislation also directs the defense minister to appoint a military advisor for each of Egypt's 27 provinces. Now, the United Nations and the OIC has welcomed the implementation of the RIYADH agreement signed by Yemen's government and the Southern Transitional Council. The mechanism covers maintenance of ceasefire and de-escalation between the legitimate government and the southern rebels. UN Special Envoy for Yemen Martin Griffiths said the move an important step towards the peaceful resolution of the conflict in Yemen. In a statement, Secretary General of OIC Youssef Al-Uthaymin reiterated the implementation of deals reflects success of Kingdom's political efforts. He said the Kingdom adopted a balanced approach in dealing with both parties. Earlier, Yemen's government and the Southern Transition Council agreed to return to a stalled peace deal brokered by Saudi Arabia. Iraq's Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi has instructed security forces to refrain from the use of violence on demonstrators. This comes after 3 people were killed during demonstrations against the power cut in Baghdad and Najaf this week. In a statement, Kadhimi's media office said the Prime Minister also asked officials to meet the legitimate demands of the protesters. It said Kadhimi held meetings with top security officials of the country, including the head of National Security Agency. The office said they discussed security issues and ways to tackle criminal gangs, kidnapping and killing protesters. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Unidentified attackers have killed 14 villagers and wounded another 6 in Nigeria's central Kogi state. The police has termed the incident as communal violence. In a statement, police said assailants on motorcycles randomly opened fire on locals in the Agbudu village. It said 13 of the dead have been identified as members of the same family. Police said an investigation has been launched into the incident, adding that a long-standing row over land rights was a possible motive. Now over to Mali, where the opposition has threatened a second wave of civil disobedience if President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta does not resign. Opposition leader Choguel Maïga said the second phase will start 3 days after the Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha. The first movement was suspended after regional leaders stepped in to solve the crisis, but they have failed to mediate a truce as the political deadlock between the government and the opposition continues. The demand for Keïta's resignation started in June over a crumbling economy and alleged corruption. President Keïta has been in office since 2013. Meanwhile, Britain has named career diplomat and intelligence officer Richard Moore as the new chief of the Secret Intelligence Service MI6. In a statement, the British government confirmed that Moore will succeed Sir Alex Younger in autumn. Moore was born in Libya and studied philosophy, politics and economics at Oxford University. He was also a Kennedy Scholar at Harvard University. Moore has been serving as Director General of Political Affairs at the Foreign Office since 2018. He has also served as British Ambassador to Turkey from January 2014 to December 2017. In a landmark decision after 75 years, Japan's Hiroshima District Court has recognized survivors of the atomic bombing's black rain, which now makes them eligible for free medical treatment. The court said 84 plaintiffs who are suffering from illness linked to radiation exposure are entitled to local government's free medical treatment. These survivors are now in their late 70s to 90s. The landmark ruling comes a week before Hiroshima marks the 75th anniversary of the August 6th attack, which reduced the city to rubble and killed an estimated 140,000 people. In Japan, one person has been killed while 17 are injured in a suspected gas leak explosion at the Onyasai restaurant in the Fukushima prefecture. The country's fire department said the injured were taken to the hospitals as 2 victims remain in serious condition. Authorities said there was no sign of a fire at the site of the recently renovated restaurant that was due to reopen on Friday. They said the blast blew out walls and windows of the building. The local government has closed off and evacuated the area. In a statement, the company apologized to the victims and said it's working with authorities to determine the cause of the incident. Moving on, Bangladesh says around 37% of the country has been flooded after recent spells of torrential monsoon rains. The country's National Disaster Response Coordination Center says over 5 million people in 31 districts have been affected by the floods. It said people of the low-lying areas have been worst affected. The center said over 900 kilometers of roads have been washed away by the floods. It said 119 people have died from the torrential rains this year so far. Now, the U.S. has threatened Brazil of consequences if it allows China's Huawei technologies into its 5G network. In an interview, U.S. Ambassador to Brazil, Todd Chapman, said Brazil can suffer a drop in foreign investment if it persists with Huawei. Chapman said firms hesitate to invest in countries where intellectual property is not protected. The U.S. envoy said Washington is willing to assist its allies who choose to buy telecoms infrastructure from trustworthy suppliers. President Donald Trump has created the U.S. International Development Finance Corp to counter China's global influence with a $60 billion fund. Earlier last month, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro said the 5G deployment will have to meet national sovereignty and data security requirements. Chinese drug company Sinopharm and Brazil's Parvana Said have agreed to launch the 4th major COVID-19 vaccine trial in Brazil. The Brazilian authorities say regulatory approval will be sought in the next 2 weeks. Head of Brazil's Parana Tech Institute, Jorge Calado, said they will soon finalize their proposal. Brazil's COVID-19 outbreak, the world's worst outside the U.S., has made it a global testing ground for potential vaccines. Sinopharm's candidate vaccine is already being tested in the United Arab Emirates with 15,000 volunteers. Now, the European Commission has signed a contract with the makers of COVID-19 life-saving drug remdesivir to secure treatment doses for the region. The bloc said the deal with Gilead will ensure the treatment of approximately 30,000 patients presenting severe COVID-19 symptoms. The EU Commission spokeswoman Dana Spinen said the Commission has agreed to pay $74 million to purchase this life-saving drug. On July 3rd, remdesivir became the first treatment to be authorized for a conditional marketing. The medicine has been declared first known treatment for COVID-19. The European Union has sent 41 tons of humanitarian aid to South Sudan through 45 air bridge flights. The EU Commission said it has financed the delivery of over 1,100 tons of medical equipment to critical areas in Africa, Asia and the Americas this year. It said the air bridge flight transported 1,475 medical and humanitarian staff since its launch on May 8, 2020. Commissioner for Crisis Management, Janice, says the bloc will continue to coordinate at international levels during the pandemic. He also said the EU is closely coordinating with the UN flight operations managed by the World Food Programme. The origin of the giant sarsen stones at UK's Stonehenge has finally been discovered with the help of a missing piece of the site, which was returned after 60 years. This comes after the archaeologists from English Heritage carried out the research and test. The monument's smaller blue stones have been traced to the Preseli Hills in Wales, but the sarsens had been impossible to identify until now. The archaeologists pinpointed the source of the stones to an area 25 kilometers north of the site near Marlborough. A test of the meter-long core stolen and moved to the US during 1958 excavation was matched with a geochemical study of the stunning megaliths. Scientists say the location of the origin will help identify the routes and means of transportation of the massive stone pillars. Now, the television's biggest awards, the 72nd Emmys, will be held virtually this year due to COVID-19 pandemic. Executive producers have written to Emmy nominees that there will not be a traditional gathering in Los Angeles. The producers say they are mulling over the details, including what elements will be live or if winners will be informed beforehand. Earlier, the nominations for the 2020 awards were announced, which Netflix dominated with a record 160. It was followed by HBO with 107 nominations, including a surprise nod for Zendaya, the 23-year-old star of the teen drama Euphoria. The envelopes are scheduled to be unsealed on September 20th during a ceremony broadcasted by ABC and hosted by Jimmy Kimmel. European markets have pulled back as investors react cautiously to reports of major corporate earnings. The pan-European stock 600 has slipped, with banks and autos both shedding almost 2% to lead the losses. London's FTSE slumped over 1%, while Frankfurt's DAX dipped close to 2%. Paris's CAC 40 lost over 0.5%. Earlier, most stocks in Asia Pacific edged up after the US Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged. Hong Kong's Hang Seng, Australia's ASX 200 and Seoul's Kospi made modest gains, but Japanese stocks edged down, while mainland Chinese bourses traded mixed. The US Federal Reserve Bank says the recent surge in coronavirus cases has begun to weigh on the economic recovery. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said the restrictions aimed at containing the pandemic are dimming hopes for a quick economic rebound. In a policy statement, Federal Open Market Committee said economic activity and employment will take some time to recover. All committee voted to keep short-term interest rates at between 0 and 0.25% until full economic recovery. Powell echoed the policy statement as he pledged to support the economy to achieve maximum employment and price stability goals.
The Federal Reserve's response to this crisis has been guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people, along with our responsibilities to promote the stability of the financial system. We are committed to using our full range of tools to support the economy in this challenging time. We have held our policy rate near zero since mid-March and have stated that we will keep it there until we are confident that the economy has weathered recent events and is on track to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals.
Newly crowned Italian champions Juventus have suffered a shock 2-0 defeat at the hands of 13th place Cagliari at the Sardegna Arena. Both Luca Gagliano and Giovanna Simone scored in the first half for the hosts as they valiantly denied an old lady onslaught to keep a clean sheet. Cagliari's clean sheet meant star Cristiano Ronaldo's hopes of finishing the season as top scorer also faded away. The Portuguese attacker is on 31 goals for this season, 4 behind Lazio's Ciro Immobile, with only 1 league game left to play. Earlier, Lazio beat relegated Brescia by 2-0 as Immobile hit his 35th goal of the season, one short of Gonzalo Higuain's record of 36 goals. Elsewhere, AC Milan won 4-1 at Sampdoria. Lecce came back to beat Udinese 2-1, while Sassuolo thumped Genoa 5-0 at home. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.